everybody ready to go? We negate with one observation: the national debt is irrelevant, as Cammy in 2017 indicates that investors are not remotely worried about the debt, and it is the least of the country's worries. Further explaining that the United States is heading toward a technological revolution with the help of developments in the internet, robotics, and automation. He concludes that these advancements in the capacity to create would spur unprecedented wealth creation, making the debt negligible. Mandel in 2017 quantifies advances in technology are about to open 4/5 of the economy to a transformation into a productivity powerhouse. Federal revenues will go up $3.9 trillion to go to cutting the debt. Because of this confidence in technology, O'Brien in 2018 explains that Treasury bonds are in high demand and will always be in high demand. Further concluding that selling bonds increases economic growth, it is for the aforementioned reason that the House Budget Committee in 2017 concludes that the best strategy to decrease the deficit is to grow the economy, as the 0.1 percentage point in increase in economic growth reduces the deficit by $270 billion. Contention 1 is big austerity energy. Reducing the debt is harmful because the U.S. must run budget surpluses to avoid adding to it. This would require deep cuts, as the CBO in 2018 finds the deficit at $804 billion this year and will permanently reach $1 trillion in 2020 unless Congress cuts spending. Critically, Zelzer in 2017 observed that the GOP wants to cut federal healthcare and anti-poverty programs because of the deficit. While the right usually encounters backlash whenever they try to attack specific federal benefits, cutting budgets in the name of deficit reduction offers a less toxic mechanism for achieving the same goal. This approach will dominate debt reduction, as Johnson in 2017 writes that politicians, Democratic to conservative, complain America is running out of money when it comes to helping minorities, but that disappears when talking about the military. Matthews in 2017 confirms, finding that Republicans want to cut health programs by 30% by 2027 and cut food stamps and anti-poverty programs by 15%. After surplus is reached, funds must be reallocated to pay down the debt, further exacerbating these severe cuts. The impact is lives. Matthews explains the proposed $140 billion cuts of food stamps would cut 10 million people off. The CBPP in 2018 finds federal funding cuts for Medicaid and the repeal of individual mandate will lead to a total coverage loss of over 20 million. This is deadly, as Himmelstein in 2017 finds that being uninsured leads to a 17% increase in the risk of death. Contention 2 is infrastructure. The ASCE in 2017 finds the nation's overall infrastructure is in a stage of deterioration and at a strong risk of failure. Thus, Bernstein in 2017 writes that it's time to redirect infrastructure to support jobs and businesses that make our cities more productive and bring jobs and economic vitality to all communities, even the poorest. Fortunately, Whalen in 2018 argues that there is growing bipartisan support for a massive infrastructure investment called the Green New Deal, a fiscal stimulus program that invests $7 trillion into green infrastructure throughout the United States. This is why Levitz in 2017 concludes that Trump is beginning to signal infrastructure as a point of compromise between Democrats and Republicans. There are two impacts. The first is promoting growth. Mayer in 2018 argues that the Green New Deal provides economic stimulus that can successfully jumpstart the U.S. economy. Romero and Jones in 2018 expands, writing that the Green New Deal will provide jobs in green infrastructure, in green technology, lower the cost of living for low-income families, and open millions of jobs in construction and infrastructure maintenance. These jobs are uniquely beneficial, as Bivens in 2014 explains that jobs created are disproportionately high and middle and high wage. Bottom wage employment is half that of the rest of the economy. Thus, CNT finds that new infrastructure strategies reduce the population living in poverty by 25%. Critically, Stupak in 2018 concludes that deficit-neutral infrastructure budgets are largely ineffective at decreasing the unemployment rate. Second is green technology. The benefits of green technology are virtually endless, as a study from the Journal of Environmental Management asserts that green infrastructure has a laundry list of avenues to combat climate change, including carbon sequestration and the absorption of air pollution. The study ultimately concludes that green infrastructure would overwhelmingly help vulnerable social groups. The threat of climate change is existential, as Bushman in 2016 indicates that climate instability and massive sea level rises create an environment that humans cannot adapt to, threatening extinction. Green infrastructure is the only meaningful solution to the ever-present threat of climate change, with the JPEB explaining that due to the economic sustainability of carbon capture systems, they are the single best technology to drastically reduce greenhouse gas emissions, leading to 1/5 of emissions reduction within 2050, thus negate.
Okay, we'll take some prep time right now. Wait, yeah. Yeah, okay. Yeah. 9 seconds, please. Okay. Is everyone ready? Cool. Francesca and I affirm our sole contention is the doomed debt disaster. The United States federal debt has soared to unsustainable levels. Trading's Economic 17 reports the debt stands at $21 trillion, totaling 105% of U.S. GDP, a historical high. The debt will only grow. 2016 of Brookings finds that Trump's recently passed tax cuts will quickly plunge America $10 trillion deeper into debt. The United States is running out of places to borrow. Davy 17 reports that because of the unprecedented increase in the debt since 2000, foreign debt investors have lended 17% less annually, and domestic investors have lended 2% less annually. concluding the government must soon entirely turn to the Fed, who pays the debt by printing money, drastically increasing inflation. Amadeo furthers 2 days ago that inflation generated from high debt will collapse the value of the US dollar, creating global economic turmoil as investors flee to other currencies, leading to hyperinflation, high interest rates, and market volatility, inevitably sending the United States into a depression. More specifically, letting the debt surge will result in two devastating impacts. Subpoint A is a fiscal stimulus. The federal government releases a fiscal stimulus or an increase in government spending during a recession to prevent further damage and kickstart economic growth. Unfortunately, Haas 16 warns a high debt load constrains the government's ability to release a stimulus without triggering a debt crisis. For example, Collins 18 notes that due to low debt levels in 2008, the government responded to the recession with a large stimulus, paving the way for economic recovery. However, he finds that the current mounting debt eliminates the government's ability to respond to future downturns, making the recession deeper, longer, and more painful. Blinder of Princeton University 10 explains that without the 2008 stimulus, GDP would be 11.5% lower, 8.5 million more jobs would be lost, leading Danziger 12 to conclude that stimulus packages reduce the number of people living in poverty by 2 million. Even if the government can pass a fiscal stimulus, Romer 17 from UC Berkeley explains that high debt empirically causes policymakers to delay intervening in the beginning of a downturn, resulting in a 6.7 larger drop in GDP. Subpoint B is interest. Boston 18 explains that as the U.S. debt rises, debt holders demand higher interest rates to compensate for the increased risk the government defaults or delays repayment. For this reason, Moore 10 finds a 10% increase in the debt caused a 2-point climb in U.S. interest rates. The first impact is cutting welfare programs. Tully 18 finds that 1/5 of government spending will quickly go to servicing interest on the federal debt. Because the debt and interest payments cyclically compound, the CRFB explains in 18 that waiting 10 years to reduce the debt increases the size of needed cuts by half, concluding a debt reduction package now would boost average income by $5,000. Collins 18 furthers that large interest payments take away limited government funds and make it impossible to prop up financially strapped welfare programs, concluding Medicare will run out of money by 2029 and Social Security will be insolvent by 2034. Ravaging welfare would be disastrous. Campbell 18 of Vox finds these welfare programs directly kept 45 million people out of poverty in 2017 alone. The second impact is electrifying emerging markets. The BBC 18 explains that higher U.S. interest rates disincentivizes investors from investing in developing economies because they gain higher returns from buying American Treasury bonds. In fear of losing capital, central banks in these countries hike their own interest rates in response, making it harder for the poor to access credit. The BBC continues, rising U.S. interest rates are already fueling currency crises across the globe. The more interest rates rise, the worse it gets. Navarro 18 of the Journal of Monetary Finance empirically verifies every 1% increase in U.S. interest rates reduces developing nations' GDP by 0.8%. Historically, a 2015 Jubilee Debt Campaign reports finds that rising U.S. interest rates in the 80s and 90s single-handedly erased 2 decades of economic development in emerging markets and relegated an additional 125 million people into poverty. Affirm.
Can I see the evidence that a 10% increase in the debt would increase interest rates by 2 points?
Yeah.
You ready?
Yeah.
Alright, so where are these foreign investors that are fleeing the United States going?
I would say they're going to a lot of places. One of them is China, but they're all just inevitably leaving the United States.
Okay, so they're going to China. What about decreasing the debt causes them to shift those investments?
Well, they're leaving the United States right now because of the high debt.
Yeah, I get that. There's also high debt in China too. Why does this shift?
The United States is like really unstable right now, right? Because of high interest rates and a lot of instability. We have the highest debt like in the world. That's why like investors are leaving right now.
We don't have the highest debt in the world. Japan has the highest debt in the world.
Okay, well like it's not China. So like the United States comparatively has
Okay,
more
you have a
debt.
question.
Yeah. Okay. So what exactly is this Green Deal and what's the probability of it being passed?
The problem, well, I'll answer your first question first. Okay.
Yeah.
So the Green New Deal
Yeah.
is essentially a series of infrastructure policies that create green,
Okay.
like,
Green tech.
okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the second part, it's popular now because our Wayland evidence indicates that there's bipartisan support for green infrastructure. And then our next piece of evidence indicates that infrastructure is a point of compromise among Democrats and Republicans, which means that it's very likely that because Republicans want infrastructure
Okay,
bills
yeah.
passed, that there will be green infrastructure provisions within those bills. Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Okay, what causes delays in stimulus packages being produced? I
What
guess?
causes delays?
Yeah,
Oh, like the Romer evidence?
yeah.
We tell you that a high debt load like constrains the government's ability because they don't want to they want to like wait and see how bad the recession is before significantly adding to the debt
Okay, why does that change when you decrease the debt?
because they don't have to look to
But
like if
you
the debt increases.
Right, but you're still not sure whether or not the recession is going to be short-term or long-term. Why does that decision calculus change just because of the
Oh
debt?
yeah. Well, the reason why they wait to see like how bad the recession is because if it's like not that bad, they don't want to significantly have like a really huge stimulus and add to the debt if it's just like not that worth.
Why?
Like why would you want to add to the debt like if you don't have
I mean,
to?
I don't know why, but the government's been doing it for the past 50 years, so
No, we can like
why would they hesitate when the economy's entering a recession and they want to release a stimulus package?
that's what they did in 2008, right?
Yeah,
Like,
I get that they did it in 2008, but what about the status quo indicates?
I mean, the debt's only higher. Like, if they did it in 2008, we would say if the debt's higher now, it's going to be even worse. But can I have a question?
Sure.
Okay, so what's the probability of, like, welfare being cut?
Very high. Republicans in Congress and the Senate will only
Yeah.
allow austerity measures to happen to.
What about Democrats, though? Don't they control the House now?
Yeah, they control the House, they
So
don't
why
control the
would
Senate,
they-
they don't control the presidency, like,
Oh, okay, but,
They-
like, why would they allow concessions for cutting welfare?
because they are forced to, because they need to balance their budget.
Why couldn't they do other things like closing tax loopholes?
Closing tax loopholes, it doesn't give you enough money to
Why
pay
couldn't
the
they, like,
900.
increase, like, the capital
You
gains
can do a
tax?
lot of things, but our argument is that you are forced to do austerity cuts.
Why? Like, why can't they do
Because
other
the debt
things?
because the deficit is so large that in order to pay it back
Yeah,
and
wait.
still have enough money to pay down the actual debt, you would have to have massive cuts.
Can we see that like, you have to do welfare?
I mean, that's just math,
Okay, that's fine.
So you have no card saying like,
Yeah.
not in constructive.
Okay.
alright.
Alright.
Okay. It's gonna be starting with an add-on to the negative, kind of like Wayne. Is everyone ready?
Wait, sorry.
Wait, what is it?
What?
Where are you starting?
Just start off with like a little itty-bitty overview that's kind of long. Is everyone ready?
Okay, where do we wait?
Make sure we know where you are.
Yeah, just float it like the bottom of the neg, wherever you want.
Alright.
Yeah. Is everyone good?
Yeah.
Okay. Both sides agree that recessions are simply a part of modern economies. Thus, the round should be focused on mitigating the effects of recessions rather than trying to solve them. And we would tell you infrastructure can help us get out of recessions without monetary policy by encouraging bottom-up growth. When the impending recession hits, we would lose millions of jobs. For example, in 2008, we lost 8.5 million jobs. Funneling money into infrastructure would be a solution to this problem, as the McKinsey Institute finds that infrastructure spending would create 1.5 million jobs. These jobs are uniquely beneficial for two reasons. The first is because the evidence analyzes and concludes that these jobs are twice as likely to be high-paying when compared to the economy-wide average. The second reason is because the Austin evidence indicates that these jobs go to people who need them at the most or at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder, with him furthering that these jobs would be a step in the right direction to reduce unemployment gaps for minority communities. Ultimately, what we are telling you is if you promote infrastructure when the recession inevitably hits, we can solve that. It is for these two reasons that Gibson 14 explains that expanding infrastructure would increase the level of wealth held at the bottom quintile by 140% in the long term. This is why our CNT evidence corroborates that infrastructure spending has empirically reduced poverty by 25% across the country. The University of Maryland quantifies that for every $1 spent on infrastructure, you create $3 in economic output, with these effects magnified in times of recession. Ultimately, our advocacy is the way we got out of the Great Depression was by FDR implementing the New Deal, which was doubling down on infrastructure policies. If we have infrastructure policies, we win the round. Now, if some reason they're winning the econ debate, you still vote for us, because a study from the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond concludes that climate change would curtail economic growth by 1/3 if we continue and sit back and watch. So ultimately, if we have the risk or the only chance of solving for any green tech impacts or climate change impacts, you vote for us, because we would tell you that they're doing nothing to solve for climate change. Now go into to their first contention. They tell you that debt is at unsustainable levels. Cross-apply the observation. Our Tammy evidence is very good on this question. He literally indicates that right now we are at the verge of a tech revolution. For example, when we discovered coal, American workers got 20 times as efficient. Automation, robotics, and internet would only make us even more efficient. That's why, with this revolution, he quotes, we would quote, dwarf the debt. Our Mandel evidence does the warranting, concluding that automation creates $4 trillion in just 1 year. That answers back their claims. Now, go on to where they talk about how the debt would only increase. It wouldn't, because the observation fundamentally means there is no reason you should prioritize the debt if it is going to be dwarfed. Now let's go into their first contention, where they talk about a fiscal stimulus. History is against them, because when you analyze Japan, this is what Isaac alludes to in First Crossfire. Japan's debt to GDP ratio was 230 times worse than the United States, but their stimulus package was much larger than the United States in 2008. That ultimately means there is no link between how much debt you have and how much stimulus packages you have. The warranting is simple. If our economy collapses, every other economy would collapse too, because of the spillover effect. The United States is involved in all these other economies, which ultimately means that if you were to vote for the affirmative, you're not doing anything other than prolonging the recession. That's why other countries have a vested interest in allowing us to borrow money, and that's why we can borrow forever, and these interest rates don't actually matter because you can borrow them on them forever. But then on their link evidence where they talk about how in 2008 there's a high stimulus, fundamentally what we are telling you is spending in a recession is a negative argument. They cannot choose when you prioritize debt and when you prioritize economic growth. Fundamentally, the way we got out of 2008 was by increasing the deficit and increasing the amount of debt we had. That ultimately means that they can't pick and choose when we should prioritize debt. What we are telling you is if you prioritize debt reduction through a recession, the recession would get 3 times as long and twice as deep. That outweighs their arguments, because we would tell you 900 million people were pushed into poverty because of 2008. Multiply that by 3 and 2, that's a big number. Now let's go into their second warrant where they talk about interest. We would tell you from Jacob Tammy, when he empirically analyzes, that their evidence is just completely wrong, because it talks about the percentage point in increase in interest rates. It doesn't actually talk about the percentage point. But even more so, if you analyze Jacob Tammy, he tells you that over the past 30 years, the debt has increased 30-fold, but interest rates have fell by 8%. This evidence is better because even if interest rates are increasing in the short term, in the long term, they would level out. Now let's go into their arguments about government programs. We would tell you that the only possible way you can even meaningfully reduce debt is to have austerity. Our evidence from our disadvantage on Medicare spending is clear. Even if we cut the entirety of Medicare spending, you would still have massive amounts of debt, and that would push 10 million people into poverty. But then, where they talk about like these developing economies, empirically this is not true, because these emerging economies are receiving $200 billion of money every year right now. But even more so, you can turn the argument, because I would tell you, if you prioritize economic growth in the United States, this economic growth would spill over, and even more so, you reduce the effect of recession, which means if you want to vote off the emerging economies, we would win. But even more so, climate change disproportionately affects developing countries. That's why we win again.
Okay. We'll continue. Can we see the probability, like green deal economy? Or like,
What do you mean?
like that's gonna be passed?
The Green Deal's not a bill.
Is it it's like a series, it's like a policy movement? So
It's like that it's gonna be implemented. It's like that it's gonna be implemented.
it's like a series of reforms.
That like supports like
Can I see
the-
We have evidence that says like Trump likes it.
That's fine.
Okay.
No, wait, no, can I see that Republicans and Democrats want it?
Yeah, okay, I got
Okay,
that.
cool.
I can do
Look at
that.
that.
Wayland and the compromise evidence is level.
We have a lot of parts for that. Okay.
Okay. And then what's the other one? The Meyer?
It's the one above it.
One above it.
The Levitts.
Oh, okay. It will continue. We'll start pattern and we have 45 seconds left.
Is that 45 left?
Yes. Wait, one more second. Okay, we'll go a little more slowly. Yeah. Okay. Okay, yeah. Like 2 seconds more.
Okay, I'm gonna go arcade, staircase. Is everyone ready?
So your case or case?
Yeah, arcade, staircase. Okay. Cool. Time begins now. Go to our first contention. His only response to the thing we were talking about inherency is that he said a tech revolution is going to be coming, but we would say you can actually impact on this because Clock18 explains that AI will result in up to 800 million workers being displaced over the next 12 years as jobs become more automated. The biggest economic challenge in modern history. Whale magnitude is sure finds that unemployment increases risk of death by 63%. Literally, they're the only side that's advocating for a tech revolution. When you literally have no more people that are unemployed, it means that they can't contribute to the economy. They're literally going to be hurting the economy even more. They're going to be pushed into welfare. That means it's going to be hurting the economy at the end of the day. But then, go down to onto the first impact. We talk about how we fiscal stimulus, and they talk about how Japan could borrow endlessly. However, we would say that this empiric really doesn't matter because Graham concludes that with the United States core inflation is rising fast and already at 2%, concludes that the United States is dangerously close to overheat and needs to address now compared to Japan, who was able to do this because of low average age working age population, which is dampened to any risk of inflation. At the end of the day, the Japan empiric isn't going to be evaluated in today's round. But then they say that we can borrow forever. That literally makes no sense. Interest payments, when the debt rises, you have to keep on paying on the interest payments. It only increases at the end of the day. But then go down to our sub-point B about interest. We talk about welfare. He says decreasing interest rates. I don't even care about decreasing interest rates. The only thing is about the status quo right now. Interest payments, literally, Collins explains to you that if the interest payments keep on rising like they are right now, it literally means that Medicare is going to be gone by 2029 and that Social Security is going to be gone by 2031. The reason this is going to outweigh any of those austerity cuts is an AL probability. We don't know if Democrats are ever going to want to decrease the amount of welfare. However, we do know that they're going to be forced into decreasing this amount of social programs because the interest payments are just getting way too high. But then B is on scope because it literally decreases the entire program's incomplete entirety. That means all these people are pushed into poverty. That means he can never contribute to the economy. That means they're only hurting at the end of the day. He doesn't respond to this war, and don't let them respond to it in summary. They literally misunderstand the argument. But then go into the emerging markets, they say economic growth spills over. I would say when more people are put onto welfare and they demand on the economy even more, it means it's only going to be hurting it. The United States economy isn't going to be growing at the end of the day. Go into their case, start on the overview. We would say that Davies explains right now that they've decreased the amount of investors and the Fed will soon have to turn towards the debt. The reasoning he gives is because of the debt. We can literally show you the card. What do we explain to you? Is that's the reason why the debt matters right now. They don't respond to the Davies analysis in their rebuttal. But then secondly, we would say that all their evidence talks about how it's going to help the debt at the end of the day doesn't make sense. When you're no longer prioritizing economic growth, it means they literally aren't going to be servicing the debt anymore. But then what we say is that, thirdly, Black18 concludes that the debt is rising 36% faster than the economic growth right now. Right now in Trump's presidency, we are looking towards economic growth, but the debt is rising so much higher right now that literally means they have no solvency for decreasing the debt. Go into their first contention on austerity. Couple of responses. First, the CRP says that increases the size of needed cuts by 2 times when we wait to prioritize. The reason behind this is interest payments are only growing. We would say this is a lot worse to wait. But then secondly, we would say that the debt is only going to be more important in the future because CBO 18 reports that if we don't reduce the debt now in 30 years, it will cost 50% more compared to only 1.9% of the GDP right now. We should prioritize reducing it right now. But then go into the austerity. We would say that the only probable way of it ever being cut is through interest payments rising. However, there are 2 reasons why they're never going to take it away, intentionally under austerity. First is Pierce Belize explains in 2018 that 82% of Americans oppose it, and Scott 17 finds that only 10% of Republicans actually want it. But then second of all, McGaffey 13 finds that increasing taxes on the rich and capital gains would produce a budget surplus in 3 years. That means at the end of the day, you don't need to look towards austerity. There are alternatives. But then go down to on infrastructure. A couple responses on probability. We would say that Chang literally explains that Democrats aren't willing to give Trump a victory for 2020. That means they're never going to let him pass it. But then there's literally no probability of the Green Plan. Their cards are really miscut. It just said that there was a poll taken and that Republicans and Democrats want it. The poll A only looks at 900 people, but B, it says it was 100% renewable energy, millions of jobs. Obviously, people are going to want this. Yeah.
I'm ready whenever.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is it
Everyone.
You can do the first one.
Okay. So let's talk about infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
Do we have to defend that? Okay, let's talk about debt reduction, not infrastructure.
Yeah.
So how do you reduce the debt?
What?
How do you reduce the debt?
I would say we don't need to we could do capital gains tax.
Does a capital gains tax reduce the debt
or even balance the budget.
Yeah, it's
How?
going to create a surplus in 3 years.
Wait. Okay, but in order to create a surplus, you have to assume that you need to reduce the debt, right? So my question is, in order to balance the budget, you need to cut spending, right? How do you balance the budget?
No, we don't have to do that. We say that we can increase taxes, like capital gains tax, which literally is the exact same thing. Can I take a question?
Wait, just...
No,
actually,
we've been on this too long. Can I take a question?
30 seconds.
On infrastructure, what does your poll specifically say?
The poll says that 54% of Republicans are supporting the Green New Deal.
So how many did it take into account? What was the total poll size?
You said it was 900.
It's 900 people.
Wait,
Secondly,
actually, wait. Of all registered voters,
No.
81% are in favor of the Green
no,
New Deal.
no, I literally know the poll. I mean, I can like show you cards on this as well. The Green New Deal was
Wait, but
proposed.
Isaac's literally showing me the website right here, and it says that 81% are in favor of the Green New Deal.
Okay,
But this is not even the
how many
implementation, right?
how
If we
many
can prove to
people were in
you,
the
if we can prove to you that the Green New Deal is comparatively better than increasing, like say, a carbon tax, we would tell you that Republicans comparatively, if you were to make a response, we would have followed it by saying, comparatively, Republicans would always choose to implement green
I
tech
never said a
policies
carbon
as
tax.
opposed to tax policies.
Wait, what?
What? Okay, the reason that Republicans don't like climate change is because they don't like regulations on the economy. That's why they would oppose a
Wait,
climate tax
one sec.
traditional
Sri, in
interpretation of
order
green
to
technology.
do the Green New Deal, you have to tax people, correct?
No, we're saying we should just go into debt. That's our advocacy. The
So
debt
you
doesn't
should just go
matter.
into debt. You cold concede that investors are leaving right now.
No, the investors you talk about, A, are foreign, which is only 4 out of 22 trillion.
No,
Or B,
no,
I will
no.
tell you that
Davies
bonds are
explains-
actually increasing.
Okay.
That's the Treasury bonds argument from
Davies
O'Brien.
explains that literally a 2% decrease in domestic investors as of 2018.
I called for that card last time we hit you, and it talks about how the domestic bonds and demand doesn't actually matter because if we want more investment, we could just increase interest rates.
Wait, our card does not say that. What?
I read it.
I mean, I read my card too. It
Okay.
does not say that. You're just misconstruing
Can I have a
it.
question now?
Sure.
All right, so let's talk about infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
So how is what do you do to solve climate change?
What do I do to solve climate
Yes.
change? What?
What does the negative do to solve climate change?
I would say we don't need to prove to solve climate change. What?
So you don't do anything, right?
What?
Do you do anything to solve climate change? It's just like yes or no.
I mean, like, I don't. I mean, like, what type of question is that? Solve climate change? What?
Yeah, like do you do anything to help the environment? It's just simple.
I mean, I'm sure I can think of a way. Let me look.
Did you say anything in your speeches that indicate you
Yeah.
love the environment?
I mean, we're going to climate change.
Okay, so
People
why
do
did you
well,
not
I mean-
respond to the overview then?
What?
The green infrastructure.
We'll take our prep time. I think we have 2 minutes left, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
150.
What would you? Yeah, okay. Okay, yeah.
So we don't need this.
Okay, so you have 10 seconds left.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're gonna have like stuff you might need. It's gonna be overview, observation, and then I'll signpost from there. This-
Overview, observation.
And then I'll just signpost.
When you say overview, you mean the add-on?
Yeah, basically, yeah.
Or do you
stuff I read.
The stuff he called it like the super short overview. It was really long. Okay, are we good?
Yeah.
If we win that affirming means you cut off infrastructure, that means that we win this debate because they have conceded 3 internal links into solving recession, 2 infrastructure stimulus. Our first point is our Bivens evidence, which concludes that people who get jobs during during infrastructure spending are twice as likely to be high paying against the economy-wide average. And B, the conceded Austin evidence, which indicates that jobs go to people who need them most at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder, with the furthering that these jobs would be a step in the right direction to reduce the unemployment gap for minorities, and then also recognize that our Bivens evidence indicates that it reduces poverty by 25% around the country. That ultimately means that we have the strongest internal link into recession as long as we win a small internal link into the infrastructure. If we go to the observation, they make this really weird turn. However, it's problematic because this argument is not offensive, it's fundamentally defensive. Our argument is that there's a technological revolution that's happening now and there's nothing that either side can do to stop it. However, what it does end up doing is it ends up producing massive amounts of wealth that ultimately dwarfs the debt. That's like conceded time and evidence. At that point, you can extend all of our other evidence that indicates that it gives the federal government a $4.7 trillion. That's ultimately enough to pay down the deficit, and ultimately that means that the debt will not matter in the future and is enough of a reason to void all of the offense on their side. Now drop down to to our second contention. They have a couple of answers. None of them are very good. Their first one is about how the Democrats don't want it because they don't want Republicans to win. They want a victory for them, especially during the midterms. They say the poll takings away 500. That's just a lie. It's about all registered voters. You should call for our evidence. I literally cut it myself, so I know what it says. Moving on to, they concede the second impact. It indicates that the green infrastructure would include things like carbon capture. That decreases the amount of That decreases the amount of emissions by 1/5. That ultimately means that we can make the world habitable. Our evidence indicates that if climate change continues on its current path, it'll make the world uninhabitable and cause extinction for the entire planet. And so far as that's conceded, that's the cleanest internal link and outweighs every single argument. Even if they win some sort of impact on their side, we outweigh. Moving on to their side. Japan's in the 5th stage of the democratic transition model. They're literally aging population. Their answer makes absolutely 0 sense. Japan still had the largest stimulus package despite massive amounts of debt. That ultimately means that empirically they're wrong.
Okay, we'll continue with that. Okay, I'm gonna be starting off on our like the overview, our case, their case. Okay. But I'll find those. Okay. Is everyone ready? Ready? We're out.
Oh,
Yeah. Okay. Everyone ready? Good. Starting off on this overview, they talk about like creating jobs. What we would say is that these jobs they're creating are super high tech because they're made for green tech. That would mean that they're for the people who have like technology information. They're high like paying jobs, which means you have to have information beforehand, which means these jobs won't go to the poorest of the poor. Then they make this observation talking about an AI boom. We would say that AI boom is an economic policy. That means in their world it's going to be reduced. But what's really important is if you have the AI boom, that means that like 800 billion or million jobs are going to be lost. Those are jobs that are going to poor people. That's really bad because when those people are structurally unemployed, they can't get new jobs, they can't contribute to the economy, it makes it a lot worse. But then going on to like our top of our case, we'll tell you one, that 17% of investors have left in the status quo. That's really bad because if we lose investors, that means we're gonna have to turn to the Fed, who's gonna print more money, which increases inflation. That goes drop in summary. But then on our subpoint B about interest, what they don't respond to is really critical on welfare. With interest payments in the status quo, it's going to become 1/5 of interest payments, which means that Collins tells you by 2029 we're going to have no money left for welfare at all. That's really important because the CRP tells you if we wait just 10 years, that's going to increase by 2 times. That's really bad. And Campbell tells you that puts 45 million people off of welfare. We would say, 1, that affects the poorest of the poor because they have literally no safety net for when a recession happens, and 2, they can't get jobs because they have welfare and they're going to, it's going to like take them off of welfare. But then going on to their case. At the top of their case, remember, we just read on like the top of austerity. Remember the CBO card, who tells you if we wait 30 years to decrease the debt, it's going to increase payments by 50%, which means that we're not going to be able to have any infrastructure because the GDP is going to decrease so significantly. But then on this idea of infrastructure, 1, their card just says Trump would have to make concessions about the green tech if he wants to pass infrastructure. We would say he would never do this. But second of all, even if he says their poll is all registered voters, that's only out of 900 people. The question literally asked, do you want renewable energy and do you want millions of jobs? It didn't tell them that it's going to be a tax. It's really, really skewed. But 1, they don't tell you how much they decrease climate change. We would tell you that in the status quo, there's still going to be climate change policies. We don't destroy climate change. Thank you.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. You keep on talking about how our poll is only 900 people.
Yeah.
Why? Where'd you get this number? Like,
Only
it sounds
900.
like
Oh,
science.
it might have registered all voters, but only 900 people actually contributed to the poll.
Okay.
But
so
also
says
that
who?
would mean
Like,
that would
besides
mean
you,
that
right?
literally
I
every
mean, you can
adult
call for a
yeah,
card.
You never cited a card. You just said that it was.
it's from your card, right? Like
No, it's
if
not.
it's-
No, I said it. Gustafsson. Yes.
Gustafsson?
Yes.
Okay, well, I like this. Well, I don't know.
I mean, you don't have prep, so yeah.
I think we have like a couple seconds.
But also, like,
Maybe
if it's
you don't.
all registered voters, that would mean, like, literally every adult in this room was polled. Like, that probably didn't happen. Like,
Well, I mean, there's like a methodology for these things.
yeah, it's like 900 people.
Okay,
I doubt it.
regardless, what is the warranting that, I might have missed it in some of you, but what is the warranting for why Trump would not allow the bill to pass?
What your card says is that if Trump wanted to pass infrastructure, he'd have to, like, make concessions for the Green Deal.
Yeah.
We would say that, like, that's, like, super hypothetical and doesn't, like, give any probability
Yeah,
of
even
it.
though
Trump
your
has
impacts
been
are
pushing
huge
so
scope,
if
I've seen.
investments-
So you're saying that if you affirm the resolution, automatically we would just do things like pay interest rates. So why can't we fiat that economic growth policies are in?
That's
Because yours is a very specific type.
Yeah.
You're
But
saying
even
stat-
more so, the link that Isaac sends is that if you prioritize debt reduction, you can't have any infrastructure because you need to pay like trillions of dollars towards
Wait,
reducing the debt.
you cold
That
drop
link
the
is conceded.
CBO card who explains that our GDP is only going to decrease if we don't deal with the
No,
debt
I'll
now.
ask-
If
so-
the GDP decreases, we can never deal with infrastructure in the future.
Right,
Yeah,
so
that's-
the funky observation answers that back, but I'll say that in my final.
I mean, you dropped that in summary.
I don't think Isaac does.
He did.
I didn't. Come on now, like, you're a offender. Okay, you got a question now.
You guys know, we just ask.
Okay, so how much are interest rates going to increase over the
No,
next decade?
that's not what we tell you. We tell you that with the current rate of interest rates, it's going to become 1/5 of government spending on that.
Interest payments.
Yeah,
are-
interest
Okay.
payments. On that current trajectory we're on in the status quo.
Wait,
that's
how much
what-
is that, like, as in terms of like a gross number, like a real number?
I'm not exactly sure, but like it's with the numbers in
Oh,
the
it's
status
no,
quo.
it's gonna be 1/5 of government. That's totally
Yeah,
at the top. It's gonna be 1/5 of government spending.
Which
That
is
means.
like how much money?
Okay, I mean like it's just like 1/5. I'm not.
I'm
exactly
sorry,
sure.
I'm not exactly sure. It's 1/5 though.
Alright, do you have a question?
Yeah, sure. So in our world, do all climate change policies stop?
The green infrastructure bill does not pass.
Okay, but that's just like one policy.
Wait,
right?
how effective?
I don't think there's
green
gonna be carbon taxes
infrastructure
implemented, like.
Well, like worldwide though, you say
What?
like we don't
Wait,
solve that all
Wait,
for
if your
climate change.
impacts
like,
are just about climate change in general is horrible. I completely agree.
Okay,
But
if
you
you're
don't
gonna-
you don't explain to me how effective the Green
It's
Deal is.
fire or
do.
die, and we
Oh
say
my
we
goodness.
reduce emissions by
Like,
1/5.
we literally talk about how green infrastructure funds carbon capture plants that are able to take
green
emissions.
infrastructure. Green
Green
infrastructure.
infrastructure,
Is
not
that
a specific
Is that the
deal.
Green Deal?
Yes, green that's
not
what
all-
the Green New Deal is.
Wait,
It's
you don't
literally
see how
green
much
infrastructure.
you don't see how much like when we reduce the debt we have to take away from all green infrastructure. You just see this Green Deal.
That's fine.
It's different.
Yeah, that's fine.
I was informed we don't have any prep time. I'm going to start off on the overview. Is everyone ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
They dropped it in second rebuttal and they frontline other things, which means they intentionally dropped it. But even more so, I would tell you that their only response is that these jobs don't actually go to the poor because these jobs are made for green tech. The problem is we extended infrastructure as generic infrastructure for things like public policy, building public bridges, construction, things like that. At that point, extend the Bivens evidence, which indicates that right now you create 1.5 million jobs, which is super imperative because when a recession hits, you want to double down on infrastructure. That's what happened in the Great Depression. And that means there's two implications. A, these jobs are twice as likely to be high paying, but B, we tell you that these jobs go to lower people at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder, which is super important because it creates upward mobility because you give them high paying jobs. That means empirically across the United States, when you prioritize infrastructure spending, you reduce poverty by 25%. Prefer this, A, on probability, because this would completely go away. Necessarily, if you prioritize debt reduction, you can't implement larger infrastructure bills, but B, we would tell you that this can solve that because in times of recession, our impacts are magnified. Go on to the overview. They tell you that the AI boom is economic policy. This is not up for debate. Our evidence is very clear. Regardless of which side you vote for, a tech revolution will occur. Ultimately, the implication of the tech revolution is that we should not affirm because there's no reason to prioritize the debt. The demand evidence is conceded throughout the debate. It indicates that right now, because of the tech revolution and economic growth, you equate $4 trillion of growth. This ultimately means that all of their arguments about interest rates don't matter because the revenue that we are creating through the tech revolution can be used to pay back interest rates because we are creating $4 trillion. I asked them how much interest rates are. They didn't even give me a number, but $4 trillion could probably pay back interest rates and then some. And we would tell you that that's just how much money you make in 1 year. Now let's go into their arguments about stimulus packages. The conceded terminal defense that they don't answer is the idea that if you increase the debt in a time of recession, that means you are not prioritizing debt reduction. Fundamentally, this is terminal defense. If you want to vote off passing stimulus policies, that ultimately means that the negative is the best route because in 2008, we implemented stimulus packages by increasing recessionary spending and increasing our debt. They can't pick and choose when they affirm or negate. That's super abusive. Then, on climate change, on the impact level, they tell you that we don't testify how many people actually help. We tell you to reduce emissions by 1/5 by up to 2020, and they tell you that our evidence is super bad, but our link evidence is very good because it's bipartisan. Even if it's not bipartisan, we have clearly indicated that if you prioritize debt reduction, it's too much money to do both. You can't produce that and have green tech. They concede that they don't do anything to solve climate change. Try or die for the F. Or neg. Neg.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna go our case, their case. I'm gonna start from like this like overview type thing. Yeah. Actually, I'll start from the CBO card. Okay. Is everyone ready? Okay. Cool. Time begins now. The round is over when they still concede the CBO card. What we explained to you is that if you wait 30 years to reduce the debt, it literally means that it's going to have to be cost us 50% more compared to 1.9% of our GDP right now. That's going to be a clean turn on their case because specifically, we explained to you the CBO card means that your GDP is going to decrease. When the GDP decreases as a direct result of the debt, then that means at the end of the day, they're never going to be spending towards infrastructure. They're going to be trying to help the GDP. They're not going to be going there. That's a clean turn. They literally dropped this card. That's a winning card. But then they start off by saying that they can actually create tons of jobs through infrastructure. They're having two different advocacies through the entire round. First, they say the Green New Deal. We respond to Green New Deal in summary, but then they bring up general infrastructure and try to get out of all these responses. What we would say is they don't frontline that Chang, who I said in my rebuttal, who explains that specifically Trump doesn't want to give them a victory Democrats want to give them a victory for 2020. That means specific, like general infrastructure is never going to be passed at the end of the day. That means at the end of the day, they're not going to be winning the infrastructure. That's super, super blippy. They don't give any impact clarity. The cleanest way to vote is on our side. We explained to you, which they literally cold drop in entire speeches, is that interest payments right now in the status quo, without rising interest rates, are rising so high. We explained to you, specifically, Collins explains that Medicare is going to be gone by 2029 and Social Security is gone by 2034. Campbell explains that 45 million people are pushed into poverty of current rates of interest payments. This is going to outweigh for two reasons. First is on probability. We don't know if ever the Green Deal is going to be passed. However, we do know that if we're on the current trajectory, interest payments are going to crowd out welfare. But then secondly, we would say that during a time of recession, if welfare literally, all these people are put into poverty, that means at the end of the day, they're never going to do that. But then, on the AI thing, we would say at the end of the day that the money generated from AI is never going to be servicing the debt because they're not prioritizing debt reduction in their world anymore. But in second of all, it pushes 800 million people into poverty as a direct result because they lose their jobs. That means they can contribute to the economy, pushes it away.